Alright, so the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to take a little bit of a look at how the actual skeleton forms. In order to do this, first off, we got to talk a little bit about cartilage growth. Cartilage, a lot of times, is going to be the starting point for bone growth, as we'll see. Because of this, we need to understand how cartilage grows a little bit in order to find out how we get the kind of starting point for a lot of the bone growth that we're going to see. So cartilage growth, like it says here, begins during embryonic development. You can see that there's really two main types of growth that can happen in cartilage as well as bone, and that is interstitial growth, which is kind of in the inner regions getting more space in there, versus appositional growth, which is increasing the width but not really changing the inside diameter at all. Interstitial growth, really with cartilage, a chondrocyte is going to be within that little island, that lacunae. You're going to have one in there. What's going to happen is that cell's going to divide. Now you have two chondroblasts in this lacunae, and they're going to secrete matrix until they're separated again and in their own little lacunae again, at that point called a chondrocyte. Again, that's going to create more in between there. That is a type of that interstitial growth. So you can see here, single chondrocyte, it divides. Now you have two secreting matrix to separate themselves, and you get growth between them internally. That is that interstitial growth in kind of the inside of the cartilage. So we're going to see appositional is going to take place more up here. So appositional growth usually right on the underside of the perichondrium, and we can see some of the same stuff when we get to bone, as you'll see. But these stem cells you make a new stem cell that's right underneath the surface of that perichondrium. It starts laying down matrix and separates itself from the perichondrium. These, like I said, form chondroblasts, and they push apart to become chondrocytes. So you can see right here, they're underneath this. These cells kind of divide, form new chondroblasts. They lay down more matrix, and again, create more cartilage at the surface. That would be that appositional growth. Early on in development, you get both of them a lot. As cartilage gets older, we're going to see that interstitial growth will tend to decline, becomes pretty much rigid there, and then we start adding onto the outsides, and any further growth is mostly appositional around the outside edges. And again, after it's fully mature, it doesn't really grow anymore because, again, it is avascular. We don't get a lot of growth except for after injury, and that in and of itself is actually quite limited due to lack of nutrients. So when we get to bone development, some of this is going to need that cartilage background. So when we talk about the formation of bone, we talk about osteogenesis, sometimes also called ossification. And we're going to see embryos a lot of times start out with a cartilage type of skeleton, and we are actually going to convert that to bone in the process of osteogenesis or ossification. And as adults, after the bone is fully formed, we do a lot of bone remodeling. So that's the other place we're going to see a lot of this bone development or bone growth, is in repair and remodeling of bone. So again, early on, the skeleton is mainly going to be fibrous material and some hyaline cartilage. We can see at about week 8, bone tissue starts to replace some of this, and we're going to see that there's really two main types. And again, I'm not going to give you an essay that's going to say, walk me through all the steps of intramembranous ossification, or walk me through all the steps of endochondral ossification. But I do want you to have a basic understanding of what's going on with each of these. And just from the name of them, you can kind of break down a little bit of what's going to be occurring here. So intramembranous, intra, within, membranous, membrane, ossification, bone formation, within a membrane, bone formation. Pretty much what's going to happen, as you'll see. Endo, within, different way of saying it. Chondral, cartilage. Ossification, bone formation. Within cartilage, bone formation. That is, again, basically what's going to be happening in this, as you'll see. So, like I said, early on here, composed mainly fibrous connective tissue and some hyaline cartilage, making up some of these bones. As you develop a little bit more, you're going to start taking this cartilage and things here and developing those membranes and developing them into bones. You're going to have that intramembranous or fibrous membrane model here of ossification, as well as endochondral or within cartilage bone formation. Intramembranous is going to be the really a good chunk of your cranial bones as well as your clavicles. Again, flat bones for the most part on those ones, where the rest of the bones of the body are really going to be the intramembranous. Really, these ones start with this kind of mesenchyme type of background here. You have these osteoprogenitor cells, so bone stem cells in a little cluster, and these are going to be differentiate to osteoblasts and begin a center of ossification, which is going to work its way out. So again, matrix is going to form. You're going to get little bony trabeculae forming and working their way out. We'll see a bony collar will form around the outside, and then we'll have bone marrow infiltrate this area. And then again, a lot of bone remodeling will make it compact bone on each of those surfaces. So you can kind of see it here. So you get this ossification center. You have this fibrous connective tissue, this mesenchyme. You get some of these cells that are osteoprogenitor cells that differentiate into osteoblasts. They start secreting osteoid, which is going to be those fibers, and calcium salts, which are going to allow this to start working its way out from that center. You can see the osteoblasts secrete osteoid, which becomes kind of bone, traps some of these osteoblasts inside there. They become osteocytes. It works its way out. You will then get embryonic blood vessels traveling in here into these trabeculae. You get this mesenchyme getting condensed at the surfaces here. And then what we're going to see at the end here is you're going to get thickening a lot of this, and you're going to get this actual outer surfaces here becoming and getting remodeled into compact bone. But again, the main thing here, started out with a little center here, worked its way out to the membranous material surrounding that mesenchymal space. Endochondral ossification, this is the vast majority of your bones. You basically get a little Gumby skeleton to start with of hyaline cartilage. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of have to break down this hyaline cartilage and convert it to bone in this process called endochondral ossification. And again, we're going to get some of these cells in these certain areas differentiating into osteoblasts and generating a primary ossification center. And again, by kind of changing what's going on there, we make these cells become osteoblasts and create this ossification center, which is going to start working its way out the bones. Initially, you get a little bony collar on the surfaces of this bone, and we'll show it in a picture in a little bit of a second here. You then are going to start getting some of these cells differentiating to osteoblasts. Start converting some of that hyaline cartilage is going to get hypertrophic, really large cells. These cells become calcified and then are going to get kind of removed out and become a medullary cavity as these are going to work towards the surface on each of these. We are then going to get secondary centers at the end of each of these long bones that are going to work their way back, and you can kind of see it right here. To me, it's kind of harder to do in words. It's a lot easier to do it with these pictures. So you get this formation of this bony collar. You're going to get some of these cells differentiating into osteoblasts and forming an ossification center. And you start getting a forming of an opening, a deteriorating cartilage area in here. These cells get really large. They start to calcify. The chondrocytes die. We can then get some osteoblasts in there that can break down some of this area here and open up this cavity. And we're going to then start working our way out towards the ends of the bone, as you can see on this one. We get some blood vessels in here. You're now going to have these ossification centers working their way towards each end of the bone, secreting kind of osteoid and calcifying this cartilage, and then remodeling that cartilage to bone as they work their way out towards the ends of the bone. We will get secondary centers starting on each of the epiphyses. They're going to be starting to do the kind of same idea, start converting that cartilage into bone, again working their way back towards that diaphysis. And this is pretty much after birth right here. The secondary ossification centers start right after birth. Up to about age 5, you're looking at something like this, or at least definitely a good epiphyseal plate. Pretty much by your younger years, you're going to have a bone that is pretty much, like by 6, 7 years old, you're going to have a, for the most part, calcified bone where you have these epiphyses that have became bone, but you have these little layers of cartilage between the epiphyses and the diaphyses. These are called epiphyseal plates. or growth plates. And this is really where you're going to be at throughout puberty. And it's really once those growth plates fuse that you're going to be at your fully realized height at that point. Like I said, once all this stuff works back in from all these ossification centers, you're going to end up with these two epiphyseal plates. And this just kind of shows you that idea right here. This would be about birth right here, adolescent year, not adolescent, but toddler and other years like that, up to puberty. At puberty, you're looking at something this. In adulthood, would be this fully calcified, no longer growth plate bone. Again, the simple sense, understanding that you're taking this cartilage background and converting it to bone. We will also look a little bit at the epiphyseal plate and how the bone gets longer and what's involved with that. But this, again, kind of shows you what's going on at the different ages here. So that hyaline cartilage in the fetus, converting some of this and getting that bony collar, starting to make that diaphysis converted to bone. At birth, you've just started to get those secondary centers that are going to work their way back towards the actual diaphysis. Through the childhood years, you basically have hardened ends of the bone and these growth plates here. When you reach into adulthood, late teens, you're going to be filling in those growth plates. At adulthood, you've now completely sealed those growth plates and you no longer have that cartilage there. So again, a lot of this takes place during development, and once we get into increased growth in length, that is that interstitial growth, which we'll be talking about here in just on the next video here, where we're looking at what's going on at that epiphyseal plate. And then we also take a little bit of a look at appositional growth, how we can make bones wider and what that means for their strength and why the body would possibly do that. So I will see you next time.